Good evening. This is February 7th, 2024. My name is Douglas Griffin. This is my Wednesday night Bible study. We are in the book of Luke. Luke is unique in that Luke is Greek. The other Matthew, Mark, John, they're all Jewish. Luke is a convert who's converted under Paul's ministry, follows Paul around, and the evidence points to the fact that Luke is writing the book of Luke and the book of Acts on Paul's behalf. Paul is in prison in Rome, and it appears that he's giving this either to Paul's defense attorney or to the judge to explain why is Paul in Rome stirring up trouble. He's preaching to the Gentiles in Rome. And so Luke's burden is to show how the gospel, which was supposedly among the Jews, and in Rome there was a huge fight between the Jews who had converted to Christianity and the Jews who had not converted to Christianity. Big fight. And then Nero, who had done some bad things, he blamed, like he set fire to part of Rome. Remember how he fiddled while Rome burned? He blames that on the Jews. Jews had nothing to do with it. Nero was crazy and setting fire to stuff, but he blames it's the fight that's going on between the Jews and the Gentile, and so all the Jews are kicked out, and all that are left in Rome are the Gentiles converts to Christianity. Paul's preaching to them. He's in Rome as a troublemaker, and Luke is trying to explain here's why Paul is preaching to the Gentiles, because the age of the Jews being the exclusive holders of the gospel has passed, and now this is the new age where the gospel is supposed to be preached to the Gentiles. So Paul's not really stirring anything up; he's fulfilling his commission. So he's trying to explain. See how Jesus started reaching out to the Gentiles? Well, that's Paul's continue that ministry. So Luke spends a lot of time showing how Jesus was in northern Israel, in the land of Capernaum and Cana and all around there, uh, which had a lot of Gentiles in it, and how Jesus started to reach out to that group. And so Paul's not doing anything differently. The Jews who were there, who were not converts to Christianity, or look at how he's preaching blasphemy, and Luke's like, no, it's not blasphemy. He's actually continuing what the gospel had predicted would happen, etc. So, Luke's an interesting book because it's coming from that perspective. Matthew is writing his book specifically aimed at Jewish readers to show how Jesus is actually the fulfillment of all these prophecies. John is writing to the new Christians. Mark is writing to the Romans also, but for a different reason. But Luke is writing in order to prove a point that all this is supposed to have happened in this way. Okay, so to take up where we left off in Luke chapter 4, Luke's purpose is to show, see how Jesus was rejected by his own hometown. A lot of Jews were rejecting him, and that's why he started reaching out to the Gentiles. Okay, so just to remind us, in Luke chapter 4, Jesus had gone to Nazareth. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but he's raised in Nazareth, but spent most of his time, his adult life of his ministry, living in Capernaum, not in Nazareth, because of how he was treated in Nazareth. In Luke chapter 4, verse 28, Jesus is in the Jewish synagogue of course, it was a Jewish synagogue. There weren't any other type of synagogues. Anyway, he's in the synagogue in Nazareth, and they don't like what he's saying. In verse 28, it says, so all those in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, and they rose up and they thrust him out of the city. And what they're mad about is they want to know, how come you've done all these miracles in Capernaum and everywhere else? All those miracles that you're doing everywhere else, do them here. So God's not, you can't tell God what to do. That's the wrong attitude. They're not believing. They're challenging. It's kind of when Jesus, when the devil was saying, "Hey, throw yourself down or turn this." It's not because, "Oh, I believe you're the Messiah and I want to worship you." It's I'm challenging you. Prove to me. And God doesn't respond to that. God responds to faith. God responds to, "Oh, I believe," uh, uh, as opposed to, "Show me." You don't believe, and I'm not a show pony. God doesn't feel like I have to demonstrate to you. I actually created you, and so you know, I, God's saying like I'm not on trial. I'm here to save you. And so like someone's in the pool drowning, and you're saying, "Here, take my hand." Well, prove to me that that's a hand. No, no, no. Take my hand. I went, "Well, how do I know?" It's like, okay, I'm trying to rescue you, and you're making me, show me your license first, and what gives you the right to. Okay, you don't believe I'm really here to rescue you. So, if you believe, then you'll take my hand and I can rescue you. But I'm not trying to prove anything to you. Is kind of what God's trying to say. So he says that to them. He says that to the people in Nazareth. Um, Naaman was not Jewish and he was healed, but these other lepers, they were Jewish, they weren't healed, even though God was sent to the Jews, right? To the widow in Zarephath, she wasn't Jewish, and yet I was preaching to all of them. God, she was helped. Her son was healed, and there were other widows who were Jewish who God had been sent to, but because they did not believe, that's why they weren't healed. And that's why this woman was. So, or this woman's household was. So Luke's quoting this. Luke loves this because it's Jesus trying to explain, I'm here. For the believers, whether they're Jewish or Gentile. So, if they're Jewish believers who believe, I'm there. If they're Gentile believers who believe, I'm with you. But if you don't believe, that's why you're not seeing miracles, because I'm not going to force you to believe. I'm not going to do a trick if you believe, I'll reward your faith. And again, I was saying the faith doesn't produce the miracles, not like, I need you to believe, otherwise I can't do it. But if you believe, that gives me the power. No, it's a reward. God can God can do the miracle whether you believe or not. If you actually are mocking me, I'm really not doing it. If you say, I have a little faith, and Jesus said, if you just have a little faith like a mustard seed, you don't have to have this incredible faith. I just have to have a tiny bit of faith. But I can't have you have mocking faith where show me something. Nah, not going to do it. So when they said that to Jesus, Jesus says, no, you're just like those people who didn't believe back in Elijah's time and Elisha's time. He says, so they arose in the synagogue when they heard these things, and they were filled with wrath. Oh, you're calling us unbelievers? Yes, I am, because you don't believe. And so they rose up and they thrust him out of the city, and they led him to the brow of the hill, it says in verse 29, on which their city was built, that they might throw him down over the cliff. They're trying to kill him. So clearly you don't believe I'm the Messiah because you're trying to kill me. Now, in the crowd of people throwing him over the cliff, let's see who's in this crowd of people. In Matthew 13, verse 55, Matthew talks about the same scenario when he went to the synagogue, and they said, is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary, and his brother James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and his sisters? Are they not all with us? His brothers and sisters are here with us. Where then did this man get all these things, these incredible words? So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, a prophet is not without honor except in his own country and his own house. And he's talking about his brothers and sisters. He's in Nazareth where he grew up, and his own household did not believe in him. His brothers are there, his sisters, they're among the crowd trying to throw him off the cliff. It doesn't say anywhere his brothers said, no, don't throw him off. They're like, yeah, throw him off that cliff. He's crazy. And I say this to say, Jesus did not spend any more time in Nazareth. So where's he going to live? Because that's where he lived until he started his ministry. And now they don't want to hear anything from him, including his own brothers. So In Luke chapter 4, verse 31, it says, then he went down to Capernaum. So the reason he's in Capernaum is because he can no longer live in Nazareth. His own family, his own household doesn't believe he's the Messiah, and they're ready to kill him as long as everybody else. They're all in that same crowd that's trying to throw him, they're trying to kill him. So he went out to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and was teaching them on the Sabbath. So every Sabbath he would go as the custom and he would teach. So we already know that a demon possessed man was there and Jesus healed him on the Sabbath. In Luke chapter 4, verse 38, it says, now he arose from the synagogue and he entered Simon's house. So it's the Sabbath. It's still the Sabbath. In fact, I call this 48 hours in Capernaum. It's still the Sabbath. He's still there. He was teaching. He cast the demon out of the man in the synagogue who had followed him there. He goes to Simon's house, Simon Peter's house. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 19 through 20, it says, a certain scribe came to Jesus and said to him, teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. And Jesus said to him, foxes have holes, birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And we take this kind of spiritually, meaning, you know, you can follow me, but who knows where I'm going to go. Jesus is telling literally, I don't have a house. So he said, I'll follow you wherever we go. Okay, you're going to really be following because I'm going to keep traveling because I don't have a home anymore. Don't have a home. My family home, they tried to kill me back in Nazareth, and I can't stay with my brothers and sisters because they were part of the ones who tried to kill me. So sure, you're going to be following me, but just know that we're going to be traveling a lot. Now, again, they're in Capernaum, and it says they entered Simon's house in Capernaum. But in the first chapter of John, verse 44, it says, Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Andrew and Peter were brothers. Where they lived was in Bethsaida. Andrew and Peter lived in Bethsaida. There's a couple places that tell us that that's where they lived. That's where their home was. So how does Simon also have a house in Capernaum? Okay, in Mark chapter 1, verse 29, and anytime we read anything from Mark, we know this is dictated directly from Peter to Mark. While Peter was also in jail, because Peter and Paul are in jail toward the end of their ministries. They're both in jail in Rome. They're both put there by Nero. Mark is taking down all of Peter's notes, and Luke is taking down all of Paul's notes. So you read the book of Mark, just know it all came straight from Peter's mouth. It says, now as soon as they had come out of the synagogue, talking about in Peter, this is in Capernaum, this is Peter's version of the very same story that Luke has. It says, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, Luke's version, it was Simon's house, but Peter's telling the whole story. Me and my brother own this house. So they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. So Peter wants to know, all four of us was there, because this is early on in Jesus' ministry. He doesn't have the 12 apostles with him yet. Only the four of them are with Jesus at this time. Simon and Andrew own this house, and I'll just tell you in advance, it's there for their mother. They built this home for her, or they bought this home for her in Capernaum. Their home is actually in Bethsaida, but they also own a home in Capernaum, and Capernaum is this very wealthy city, and they have their mother there, so she's the one that stays there. Jesus no longer can live in Nazareth and so he doesn't go back there. They try to kill him. So where's Jesus going to live? He's going to live sometimes with Peter, stay at Peter's house. Sometimes he's going to stay at Matthew's house in Capernaum. In Matthew chapter 9, verse 1, it says, so he got into a boat and he crossed over and came to his own city. But he's talking about Capernaum. But Matthew's calling that his city. Like, this is Jesus' new city, is Capernaum, because he can no longer stay in Nazareth. So now he's back in his own city, which is Capernaum. And no one ever calls him Jesus of Capernaum. He's either Jesus of Nazareth, or he's Jesus born in Bethlehem. But these disciples are letting you know, both Matthew and Mark, he's now claiming Capernaum as his home. That's where we have homes. Matthew's actually houses in Capernaum, and because Matthew is a tax gatherer and he's got a lot of money, and so he's got a home there. Peter and Andrew have a fishing business, so they've got a lot of money, and so they have a home there also, but it's a home that they bought for their mother. In Mark chapter 2, which again, the book that's dictated by Peter, it should just be called Peter. But in Mark chapter 2, verse 1, it says that again, he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Oh, Jesus is in the house. What house is he talking about? The house that he owns, that he let Jesus stay at a lot. Jesus stayed at Matthew's house a lot. He stayed at Peter's house home, but Jesus does not have a home anymore. He told the scribe, "I don't have a home, so I'm going to be staying with this person sometime, and staying with that person sometime. I'm going to stay with some friends who live in Bethany." Jesus does not have a home. So when Peter describes it to Mark, he says, "Oh, he's at Capernaum and he's staying in the house." And it says, immediately many gathered together, so there was no longer room to receive them. So people would go and gather at Peter's house or Matthew's house whenever Jesus was there. Uh, it says, it says, not even near the door. And he preached the word to them. They so packed it. So Jesus, whenever he'd show up at Peter's house, oh, he's there. Whenever he showed Matthew's house, oh, he's there. And they'd all go there. Now, the problem with staying at Matthew's house is that he was a tax gatherer, and and the Pharisees didn't like the kind of people that gathered there. Matthew's friends were also tax gatherers, and they're like, they hated whenever he went to Matthew's house. But they had no problem going to Peter's house. They would fill up Peter's house. Peter had a big house in Capernaum. It really was there for his mother, but she didn't mind if Jesus was there visiting. He visited there a lot. In Mark chapter 9, verse 28 is another time. It says, and when he'd come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? So they had just come, Jesus had cast out a deaf and dumb spirit out of a man, out of a man's child. And it says sometimes it would throw him in the fire, and sometimes it would throw him in the water, and he'd have epileptic seizures. Just because someone has epilepsy today, or they are deaf, or cannot speak, they're mute, does not mean they have a demon. But in Jesus' time, this particular child did. And so the man brought him to the disciples, and the disciples couldn't cast him out. Now, they did it at a time when Jesus had taken Peter and John up on the mountain. And that's when they'd had the vision, and they saw Jesus in his resurrected body. When he came back down, he finds the scenes where the disciples are having a fight because they're trying to cast this spirit out of this man, and they can't cast him out. So Jesus cast out the spirit, and they asked it, and it says, and when he'd come into the house, and he just calls it the house, because everybody knows, oh, Jesus is coming, but it's not Jesus' house, it's Peter's house. His disciples, why couldn't we cast him out? And Jesus goes on and explain, and when we get to that part, I'll go into that. I'm just showing us references in the Bible that we kind of took for granted. The house, whose house? Peter's house. In Mark chapter 9, verse 33, then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what was it that you were disputing among yourselves on the road? Because they got into a big fight on the way back to Peter's house from Jesus being up on the mountain with Peter and John. When they got down, Jesus walked into this big fight. Now, he already knew what the fight was about, but he wanted them to tell him. So what were you fighting about? Okay, so, but I like that he says, and when he was in the house, so Peter just takes it for granted. Everybody knows that I let Jesus stay in my house whenever he's in Capernaum. Matthew chapter 17, verse 24. And when they had come to Capernaum, those who received the temple tax came to Peter. So once, every so often they were taxed, right? You got to help contribute to the temple. This was a tradition that had started when they first started to rebuild the temple, the first time that the temple was destroyed. They took up a tax to rebuild the temple, and they just kind of kept this tax going. And so once Herod had started rebuilding the temple, they started taxing people again to rebuild the temple. You're supposed to contribute once you come. Here we are to collect the temple tax. So they came to Peter and says, "Does your teacher not pay the temple tax?" Of course, Jesus is saying, the temple is mine. That's actually my house. I'm not going to. That's my house, and so I'm not going to pay the temple tax. because that is my actual house. But I'll get into that later. Anyway, the reason they asked him is because he was with Peter so much, and everybody knew that's Jesus' second home. Well, he needs to pay the tax. But Jesus is like, no, I know that I stay here so much that you think that Peter's house is my house, but actually the temple is my house. So I'm not paying taxes on it. Um, so anyway, they go to Peter's house, and it says he rose from the synagogue and entered Simon Peter's house, and it says, but Simon's wife's mother is there, and she's got a fever. Simon's wife's mother. So this is actually his mother-in-law's house, which might be why she wasn't staying with him in Bethsaida. Here, I'm gonna buy your wife. I'm gonna buy your mom her own house in Capernaum. It's his wife's mother's house. Um, Peter's wife's traveled with him toward the end of his ministry, but at this point, she's not traveling with Peter. Peter's traveling and followed Jesus all over the place, and John and all they follow Jesus wherever he goes. And the wife just sees Peter whenever she shows up again, wherever he shows up again. But toward the end of the ministry, she traveled with him, because in Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 5. It says, "Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do the other apostles?" Because Paul's complaining, like, well, it doesn't matter what he's complaining about. But anyway, he's complaining because they're giving him a hard time. It says, uh, you don't think we should be able to take our wives with us, as do the other apostles, like the brothers of the Lord? So Jesus' cousins, but they call them his brothers. Their wives travel with them. He says, and Cephas, who's another name for Peter, like, they because Peter's wife was tired of being left by herself. So yeah, all the time that Jesus was here, I get it. You travel with Jesus. Jesus is not here anymore. He's in heaven. So I get to travel with you now. Anyway, they're at Simon's wife's mother's house that Peter built for her, and it says she was sick with a great fever. And there were two types of fever. There were great fevers and small fevers. There were little tiny fevers that you had and just take some aspirin and get over it. And then there were these great fevers that wiped you out. And Luke, being the physician, let everybody know it was a great fever. It was that type that she could have died from it. So she was sick with this translation says high fever, but it means great fever. And they made request of him concerning her, like, Jesus, can you do something about my mother-in-law? Now, this is still on the Sabbath. This is still the Sabbath. He just cast a demon out of a man on the Sabbath. And now he's showing up at the house. So in Luke chapter 4, verse 39, it says, so he stood over her and he rebuked the fever, and it left her. Here's how Peter described it to Mark. It says, so he came and took her by the hand, and he lifted her up, and immediately the fever left her. When Luke interviewed other people, they said, you fever, come out of her. He rebuked it. But Peter doesn't want to describe it that way. He took her by the hand and he just lifted her up, and the fever just left her. So Peter's going to describe it not because that's his mother-in-law, and he didn't want anybody to know that Jesus yelled at her. But he didn't yell at her. He yelled at the fever. And so when Jesus says, come out of him, he's not yelling at the person. He's yelling at, the demon inside. So he rebuked the fever, because everything must bow to the name of Jesus. Jesus has power over all things. Fevers have to leave. Diseases have to, they have to bow to him. And so he told the fever, leave her, and it came out. And it says, and so she served them. So, and Luke back, immediately she wrote and served them, because it was her house that Peter had beat for her. And, I guess in my house, let me serve you, the people, they're visitors here. So now in Luke chapter 4, verse 40, it says, and then when the sun was setting, all those who had any that were sick with various diseases brought them to him. Why did they wait until the sun was setting? Because it's the Sabbath. It's the Sabbath, and there's a law against, there's a misinterpretation of the scripture. So they had sick people that they were trying to carry over to Jesus, but they waited to bring him the sick. Now, Jesus healed her on the Sabbath because you can heal on the Sabbath, but that's not what the Pharisees believed. If you recall in John chapter 5, starting in verse 8, Jesus went up to the man who was at the pool of Bethesda waiting to get carried in. And because every so often an angel would show up and trouble the water, when they, I'm sorry, they didn't see the angel show up, they would just see the water be troubled. And again, this is mercy. God providing healing. I don't need your faith. I'm just going to do this whether you believe or not. Again, you can't mock it. You can't. They're there waiting for the troubling of the water because they believe that every so often when the water's troubled, they can get healed. So they believe. But he told the man, "Hey, do you want to be healed?" And the man said, "Oh, well, no one's going to heal. I'm going to." He complained instead of, "Yes, I want to be." He practically lost faith. So Jesus is there to restore his faith, and he said to him, "Rise, take up your bed and walk." And immediately the man was made well, took up his bed and walked. And that day was the Sabbath. And that's why John points it out, because the Pharisees were looking at the law incorrectly, the law that said, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So they believed that meant you can do no work. What it meant was on the Sabbath day, stop doing your work, do my work. On the Sabbath day, dedicate one day to me where you're not concerned about, I got to work all day and get bread. But give me one day, he's telling them at that time, where you are just totally trusting me that I'm going to take care of your needs. So on that day, I'm going to give you enough food for 2 days so you don't have to work. I'm going to give you enough food for 2 days. He said that in the wilderness. And so that let there be one day where you're not worried about yourself, where you're just focused on me. But he's not saying you can do no work, because God may tell you to do some work on that day. He's just saying it's my day. Give me one day where you're trusting me totally. But they took that to mean you can do no work, zero, period. Even you can't carry somebody to Jesus and have them be healed. So they had sick people waiting to get healed. Like, we got to wait till the Sabbath because that would be doing work. And so that's why he's saying it was the Sabbath. And verse 10 says, the Jews of John 5, the Jews therefore said to him who was cured, it's the Sabbath. It is not lawful you to carry your bed. And the man said, but the man who healed me, he said, carry my bed. So I'm going to listen to him. Who am I going to listen to? The man who healed me, obviously, who's from God, are you. You can carry your bed if God tells you to do it. It's not a holiday where you may do no work. Don't you do work. If God tells you to do, if you pray about it and God tells you to do something, you can do it. It's his day. So they were totally misunderstanding the scripture. So Jesus purposely kept healing people on the Sabbath on purpose. The man born blind, the man, he would do stuff on the Sabbath on purpose. He healed Peter's mother on the Sabbath just to show them you guys have this all wrong. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, it says, Jesus said to the people, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Meaning God didn't create men so that he could have a bunch of people to worship him on the Sabbath. He didn't make man for the Sabbath. Like, I came up with this holiday called the Sabbath. Now I'm going to make man so that they can worship me on the Sabbath. He says, you got it wrong. The Sabbath was made for man. I created a day where you don't have to worry about anything and you can just rest and cease from your work and just rest in me. And whatever I tell you to do, you do. Or if I tell you to do nothing, don't do anything. But I've created a day where you can relax now. But it wasn't a day where you have to spend all your time. I didn't create the Sabbath first and then you. He says, therefore, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Whatever I say goes on the Sabbath. So the Son of Man, if the Sabbath was made for man and I'm the Son of Man, then whatever God says, you follow my instructions on the Sabbath. Don't think of a day where you better stand in the room and just hide yourself. If God sends you to do this or God sends you, whatever God sends you to do, he says it's my holiday. In Hebrews chapter 3, the writer of Hebrews, and I always say the writer of Hebrews because it's not Paul. The writer of Hebrews in Hebrews chapter 3 is trying to explain the difference between work and rest, and working in order to get saved and resting in that you've already been saved. He's trying to say, stop working for your salvation. It's already been purchased for you on the cross. You don't have to do things in order to get saved. You don't have to give a certain amount of money and then God will save you. You don't have to go to church a certain amount of times and that now you're saved. There's not a thing you have to do in order to get saved. Rest in the fact that that's been done for you and now do things because you are saved. You know what? Now that I'm saved, I feel like God is telling me to do this, but you're not doing it in order to get saved. But there should be some works demonstrating your salvation, but not creating your salvation. If you're saved and God tells you to go do this, I should be able to tell you're saved because now I should be able to see your good works, the Bible says, because you are saved, but not in order to get saved. So in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 10, it says, therefore, he quotes God saying, I was angry with that generation. What generation? The generation that refused to obey me, that refused to do what I say. And I told them to cross into the Jordan and go into the promised land. And they're like, no, we're not going to do it. So I was angry with the generation. And I said, they always go astray in their heart. And they have not known my ways. They don't follow me. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Because the promised land was supposed to be rest. You're not working anymore. You're now resting. So they're not going to enter in my rest. And that whole people, you're not going to enter my rest. You're not going to understand my rest because you're going to try to keep working to get saved and working and working. And I need you to enter my rest. And my rest is where you just follow my direction now. You don't do things in order to get my attention. Now that you have my attention, you just rest and you know I'm going to provide for you because you're doing what I say. You're going to do this and you don't have to worry about your needs. As long as you're following my instructions, everything's just going to be taken care of. You can just rest in that. I know everything's going to be okay now because I'm just doing what God says to do. Now in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 1, the very next of chapter 4, it says, therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest. So he says, they won't enter my rest, but somebody's got to enter into his rest. Let us therefore fear, lest any of you seem to have come short of that rest. You're still working, he's telling, the writer of Hebrews is telling the Jews. Jesus has already done it all. Stop sacrificing animals. Stop doing it. You don't have to do these things anymore. Again, he's telling the unbelieving Jews. Telling the unbelieving Jews. There was a bunch of believing Jews. See, those people believe that it's already been done for them. The unbelieving one, they're still working, they're still chopping, they're still cutting, they're still sacrificing. Don't do that. Rest in the fact that you no longer have to work in order to get saved. Verse 9 of Hebrews 4, there remains therefore a rest for the people of God. For he who has entered into his rest has himself also ceased from his works as God did from him. As God did from his. I'm not working to get saved. I'm not working to please God. God's already pleased with me. So we now enter into a Sabbath rest. There's not a day that we give to God. We give every day to God. It's just a Sabbath rest that we enter in every day. We wake up going, I'm his child. He loves me. I can just rest in the fact that I'm already saved, that I don't have to prove anything to God. I'm not working in order to, I can just rest in all of that. It's a life of rest that we've now entered into. There's not just a single day of it. It's a life of it. He says, verse 11, let us therefore be diligent to enter that rest. Like, let's work to rest. let's be diligent that we are resting, lest anyone fall according to the same example of disobedience of them. And where we're not listening to God, we're trying so hard to work to get him to love us that we're not listening to the fact that he already does. So that Sabbath, Jesus is trying to demonstrate to these people the Sabbath. That's why he's working on the Sabbath. That's why he's in Peter's house on the Sabbath. That's why he's praying for the sick on the Sabbath, to demonstrate, here's what a Sabbath rest, a life would look like, where you realize I can be healed. I don't have to wait till Sunday. I don't have to wait till Sunday or whatever day you think you worship God on for this to happen or that to happen. God hears my prayer all day long, night or day. I don't have to be on my knees. I make fun of my roommate who, when I was on the road traveling and he was a devout Christian, he'd get on his knees every night to pray. And I woke up one morning and he was still on his knees. He had fallen asleep on his knees. He didn't think that he could pray from the bed. If you're not on your knees praying, God can't hear you. And so it's like, dude, you don't have to get on your knees every single time. I realize that's a sign of respect to God, But if you're that tired, dude, just say, Lord, thank you that you hear me, and then fall on asleep. He bless your heart. But we certainly have certain rituals we think we have to fulfill in order to please God. If you're doing it because you want to, that's one thing. But if you're doing it because you think you have to, and God's gonna be mad at you, God's like, no, enter in my rest. Enter in my rest. You're okay. So Jesus is doing stuff on the Sabbath on purpose to say this is already taken care of. You don't have to, and we don't even have to wait till the Sabbath anymore. So in Luke chapter 4, verse 40, it says, when the sun was setting, and it was no longer the Sabbath, all those who had any that were sick with various diseases brought them to him. They waited all that time. People were just dying, like, oh, we can't do it on the Sabbath. It's like, yes, you can. But now here's Mark's version of that Peter told him. It says, at evening when the sun had set, when the Sabbath was over, they brought to him all who were sick and those who were demon possessed. So Peter wanted Mark to know there were some crazy people that were brought to my house. They're not only sick people, but they were demon possessed. Verse 33 says, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. All of Capernaum was at my door. So this is Peter giving a more emotional version of what's going on. Okay, so back to Luke's version. And he laid his hands on every one of them and he healed them. So they're at Peter's house. Jesus is there and he healed them all. Now, Luke just go on to say, and demons also came out of many, crying out and saying, you are the Christ, the Son of God. And he rebuked them and did not allow them to speak. Stop. That's false worship, devil. The man in the synagogue saying the same thing. What have I to do? And Jesus says, shut up. I want to hear from you. That's like the devil saying, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself. You are the Christ. I'm not falling for it. Come out of him. But you're the Christ. I don't care. You can flatter me all you want. You still have to come out. Because that's all they're doing. They're just trying to, but you're the Christ. You're the Son. Yes, demon, I know. Now come out. Shut up. I don't need you to praise me. Because it's false praise. So shut up. And that happened to Paul, the woman that was following him saying, these are men of the Most High God here. Finally, Paul, he got discerning of spirit. Like, oh, that's a demon. That's not. Come out of her. And then Paul got in trouble because the woman used to had the spirit of discernment, and she would tell fortune. Now that the demon was gone, then the woman didn't have any clues to what the devil was about to do to somebody next, because it was always bad news. And again, if you go to a medium and you pay, here's $100, tell me what's going to happen. Oh, bad things are about to happen. It's always something bad, Oh, this bad, and unless you come to me and you give, because they can tell you what the devil's about to do to somebody. Unless you give me a certain amount of money, terrible misfortune will come your way. But if you bring me a certain amount of money, I can give you the right charm to ward off this bad thing. Well, I'm not going to pay. And sure enough, that bad thing was happened. And that person was back the next week. Oh, yeah, I better give this person money. Well, they know what the devil's going to do because it's a demon that they're talking to. So they know what demon's going to plague you and give you a bad dream that night, or what demon's going to show up at your house and scare you and do. The devil knows what he's going to do. But it's the devil. That's why, so it's never some wonderful thing. That person wouldn't need your money if they knew what the lotto number is, but they need your money because the devil doesn't know any good thing that's going to happen. He just knows what horrible thing a demon's going to try to do to scare somebody, right? So the demons are going to say whatever. Jesus never fell for it. That demon that Paul cast out of that person, that person lost all kind of money because that person can predict bad things anymore. And here, Jesus is saying, shut up, come out, don't want to hear it. He says, for they knew he was the Christ. So, Luke chapter 4, verse 42. Now when it was day, so all night they're there and Jesus is casting demons out of people. In Luke 4:42, because Jesus has stayed the night at Peter's house. Now when it was day, he departed and went into a deserted place because he's exhausted because he had a long day. And the crowd sought him and came to him because they came back in the morning looking for him. Now here's how Peter described it to Mark. Mark 1, verse 35. Now in the morning, having risen a long while before daylight, because Peter's trying to explain how Jesus got away. He got out before daylight. Having risen a long while before daylight, he went out and departed to a solitary place, and there he prayed. Because when Peter woke up, Jesus was already gone. So he's trying to let people know, it's not like I overslept. He woke up before daylight. It was still in the middle of the night. and then here's again Mark chapter 1 verse 36. And again, just know this is Peter's version of the story. And Simon and those who were with him searched for him. Luke doesn't mention that Simon went out. He just says everybody went out. But Simon wants you to know, as soon as I woke up and Jesus was not in my house, I went, he says, and so Simon and those who were with him searched for him. And when they found him, they said to him, hey, everyone is looking for you. Now that's funny to me because that makes me think that people showed up at the door and they're the ones who woke Peter up and says, hey, where's Jesus? And he went and looked for him. Oh, he's gone. And so he showed up at Jesus and says, hey, they're all looking for you. Because Simon wouldn't have to tell Jesus that unless the people had already gotten there first and woken him up, and let him know we're looking for Jesus. And so, hey, they're all looking for you. They're all looking for you. That's not how Luke described it. He says he departed, he went to their space, and the crowd sought him. And so Peter got there before the crowd. Hey, Jesus, everybody's back in my house looking for you. And the crowd followed Peter. So they finally find Jesus. And it said, and this is Mark's version, again, which is Peter's version, verse 38. But he said to them, hey, let us go into the next towns that I may preach there also. I've already healed a bunch of sick people. I've done a bunch of stuff here. I want to go to other towns and preach to them, all the towns surrounding, every town but Nazareth, because for this purpose I have come forth. So he's staying in that northern area. Jesus did not like going down south to Jerusalem because he was just going to be met with the resistance. Let me stay in these places where people actually want to hear. Yes, there are Gentiles here who are finding out about it, and I'll heal them if they show up over here. But I want to let me stay in these areas where people really believe. So in verse 44, Luke chapter 4, verse 42, the second part, it says, and they tried to keep him from leaving him. Like when they saw Jesus, what? No, don't go. This is the crowds. Verse 43 is the final verse. But he said to them, I must preach the kingdom of God to the other cities also, because for this purpose I have been sent. And he was preaching in the synagogues of Galilee. So he would go first to all the synagogues in all these different cities in the north, and then he would go to different people's homes, and people would follow him, and he would preach. But let me preach to people who are desperate for the word. And that's what I was saying last week. There are places where they are desperate for the words, and we're sometimes abandoning those areas. But you preach, they'll show up because they want to hear. And there's some richer places and some nicer places where, I'm good, you know. And that's where we want to live. And it's okay to live there. Peter lived in a nice place, but let's make sure we are still spreading the gospel in whatever way. That doesn't mean that you personally have to get up and walk the urban streets of Compton, but maybe there are ministries there that you can support. So the people that you can support in other ways, and that's fine. But just know that those places are desperate and they're hungry, and places that we've given up on, people that we've given up on. We'd be surprised how hungry they might be for the word. They might surprise us. Okay, so next week we'll go into Luke chapter 5, and on Sundays we're in the book of Leviticus, and it's more interesting than you thought it would be. Let me tell you. Okay, thank you so much for listening. I will be back with you again either this Sunday or next week. Thanks so much. All right, bye bye.